Yeah, go on.
Speaker across the developing world and in many parts of the developed world, for sexual minorities, for races, for people belonging to minority religions, progress is unacceptably slow. People are killed for being, in many cases, belonging to these racial minorities. They are treated as if they were fit. Their fundamental rights are not guaranteed to them, and we believe the quality of their lives is miserable. Right? We believe in these cases, telling these people that this is a principle of free speech that we are upholding, it's cold comfort to them. And we don't think that's something that the government should accept. We think, therefore, that social movements that stand for these groups, for example, fighting for the rights of women, fighting for the rights of sexual or religious minorities, should get together and put in a concerted effort to get in laws and regulations that curb these forms of expressions. So what are we talking about? We are talking about books, for example, that talk about these things in a preach against these particular minorities to be banned. We are talking about people speaking out in concerts and speaking out, making these statements in churches or maybe mosques, etc. Explicitly saying that these ways of life are illegitimate. It's explicitly saying that these people are wrong for the choices that they make. But explicitly fighting to deny the rights of these individuals, we explicitly want these things to be banned. We believe that regulations can work for that. We believe people can be fined if they make those statements. We believe such organizations can be banned, and we think they are quite happy with that. Before I move on, yes.
Can I ask exactly how these progressive social movements are going to use the illiberal laws? Could you tell us the mechanism?
Yeah.
So, we think they should fight to get these laws in place. They should ask these lobby for these laws to be put in place by from the politicians. We think once these laws are put in place, the government agencies can enforce it. So we don't think that's a particular problem. Before I move on, the other problem.
So you want these movements to propose more liberal laws to politicians, is it?
So, we are talking about proposing laws that curb these expressions of freedom, or curb these expressions of freedom of speech. Yeah, so we think this particular law is illiberal in this sense, but we think it actually benefits society in general, right? So we think we would want to make a clear distinction. We don't think people have to actually make positive arguments in support or make positive expressions in support of things that they disagree with, but we think if they explicitly go out and say these things are wrong or fight against these policies, we are going to intervene, right? We think furthermore, Mr. Speaker, that liberal movements or liberal social movements or liberal vote bank is quite powerful in these countries, and we think that once they make their voices known, it's very likely that those laws would be passed, even if maybe not explicitly the best form of that law would be passed, but there would be a trend to improvement. And even if it takes some time, we think the very fact that they are saying that these expressions are wrong means that those expressions cease to be spoken in universities or in other places in that way. So we think this policy would work, right? So I'm going to talk about three things. Firstly, why is this principally right to use this in this way? And secondly, I'll talk about what actually happens to people when they are faced with such speech and such regulation, such speech and such laws. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tell you why progress is unacceptably slow in when we have a world with such speeches in place and people making these things, making these statements. So first thing, Mr. Speaker, principally, we don't think, Mr. Speaker, that there is an absolute right to free speech. We think if people are denied of fundamental things that are extremely important to them, we think that the right to be able to say what you think is less important than those people being denied of those things. We think the fact that people are made to feel as if they are lesser, as if they are dirty, is much more a violation of those people, and in these cases, the government should balance those rights. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we also think that even though it's a violation either way, some people aren't able to say what they want to, some people aren't able to organize in a way and want to pass some laws, but we believe that the violation for other people who are treated badly, who for things that are much more important for them, that to be able to say some things, we think that's a much greater violation. We think that the government therefore can step in, right? We think that there could be some backlash initially and some people might not like these policies being proposed, but we think that's fine. We think backlash often stops because these things aren't actually important. In many countries, a lot of religious groups or these groups want things to happen which the country doesn't allow, and still we see that backlash doesn't constantly happen, right? So we think that's not a problem. Okay, so having that said with the principle, I take a point from Koji.
Okay. These laws already exist in status quo and are used by governments in order to clamp down on proponents of social progressive movements. Why would you now add existing laws for them to abuse even more?
No. So we don't think these laws. We think there should be laws that say that hate speech is wrong. We don't think there should be laws that says that the government can arbitrarily intervene and violate any speech. And we think there are metrics such as, like, we had a ban on Holocaust denial in Europe. We think that that's something that the government could very efficiently implement. So we don't think that's a problem, right? Like, just because you accept the principle that free speech could in some cases be violated doesn't mean that the government has to go in all cases and violate that. We don't think that this gives the government a right to do that. So first thing, Mr. Speaker, what do these social things do? Like, people actually go on and say things like women being subservient to men. They say things like people are lesser because of their sexual orientation. That people are white and these people don't deserve to be treated in the same way that other people are treated. We think that there is no meaningful way for these people to respond to these, because oftentimes these views come from extremely highly funded organizations or people who have a lot of power in society, already an established base in society, right? This means that firstly, these people have to suffer the indignity and the shame because they constantly have these views being expressed and they can't respond to them in any meaningful way. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, they often feel guilty themselves and are weakened because of these views being perpetuated in the media and everywhere. We think because of this, they aren't able to fight for those rights, right? And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, because of this, we think the quality of their life goes down, and we think that's a problem. But I will also cover how often these inspire acts of violence against these against these people. Okay. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, I want to look at how this undermines progress in terms of making more friendlier laws for these people. Mr. Speaker, we understand that debate in general could be a good thing when there are different parties making some statements. But what we think for the vast majority of people who subscribe to these views, there is no debate because they exist in echo chambers where they listen to only a standard, only a particular form of view that's being said. We think as long as people exist who with a lot of who have a lot of voice and a lot of charisma, who are making these statements, even if these are terrible arguments, even these are silly things that they are saying, we think people aren't actually ever going to be able to listen to other views being expressed. This means that with our policy, for the first time, when these views stop, when these people stop telling them that they shouldn't go to liberal media outlets or ever listen to what other people are saying, people are gonna for the first time have exposure to those views, and that's going to make it much more likely for them to support the laws that make life bad for these people. Mr. Speaker, we agree that in the long term there could be some organic change, but that is unacceptably slow, and all the time under status quo, people are denied the basic rights. For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, we think it is important that this policy must be passed immediately. Thank you.
Living in a world where a spectrum of views exists, we need to recognize that people on the ground have found platforms to exercise their rights, and that changes has been occurring. However, using these illiberal laws to fight fire with fire, you clamp down on voices of counter-narrative as well. We think that when we will legitimize negative social construct more. The progressive liberal movements have been fighting these laws and taking a different stance is counterintuitive and hypocritical. What is this debate about? This debate is about what is the best means to garner change, how progress has already happened, and how these laws would stop that change within status quo. And we think side-opening government is very hypocritical. Three things I'll talk to you about today. Firstly, what is so counterintuitive and how you legitimize this oppressive law. Secondly, we like to analyze different spectrums of views within society, like the extremists, the moderates, and the liberals. And lastly, how the liberals and moderates will lose out on critical mass for these progressive movements. But few characterization that was missing from opening government. What is this illiberal laws? Oppressive laws. Sedition Act in Malaysia that clamp down on voices that go against the government. Speaking out against the monarchy, an anti-discriminative law in Thailand. How internet censorship is so bad in China. These are all illiberal laws. How blasphemy laws is imposed within the Middle East. Progressive social movements have been fighting this law and taking a different stance will lose them out of support and critical mass. One rebuttal that does not fit into my perspective. Firstly, they talk about how this now with this illiberal law, we enhance the quality of this life of these people, and now we stop clamping down on violence and that's all. We don't think so, right? Actual violence is going to happen worse on your side because now you don't allow counter narrative to happen. You legitimize the views of the extremists. You let that spew fire even more. Therefore, we think your quality of life does not happen on your side. Moving on to my substantive and all my rebuttals to be integrated within my. Firstly, let's talk about how this is counterintuitive. It's been a long time since progressive liberal movements have been fighting oppressive law and wanting to champion freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Therefore, they've been fighting rights for women. They've been fighting against acts that clamp down on expressions of right. We think that progressive social liberal movement and taking this stance is actually very hypocritical because you have been fighting these laws or your whole movement. And why is it so harmful? You lose out legitimacy and you legitimize that form of oppressive laws that have been clamping down on the voices within society. Therefore, we think it's very harmful. Now you use the same laws to oppress people of different voices. You need to recognize the fact there's a different spectrum of voices. Just because you clamp down on voices of one spectrum of people within society, your progress is not gonna happen. Secondly, why is it so harmful? Right? Now you allow different people within the ground to defend negative social constructs. That you don't allow freedom of speech. You don't allow people to express that look, being sexist is bad, being Islamophobic is bad, that not all Muslims are terrorists. You allow that to happen, you allow them to defend social constructs where you don't allow counter narrative within society to happen. Now let's analyze the different spectrum of views within society. Look, let's talk about how extremists will be affected within this speech. You allow them to legitimize their thoughts. You allow them to act out on their thoughts. Why? Because you don't allow counter-narrative to moderate these extremists in the first place. You only allow one viewer spectrum to exist within society with all these illiberal laws. Extremists now have that channel to tell you, oh, this view is okay, and you clamping down on me, legitimize me that view, and I have no other platform to moderate myself. Those progressive social movements, one of the most important things they've done is actually to moderate the extremists on the ground, and that's how they are affected. Let's tell how you moderates on the fence are affected. Moderates on the fence who wants to fight for a progressive social movement, now on the fence is saying, wait, you have been fighting all these oppressive laws your whole movement. Why are you now changing stance? You are causing moderates who are on the fence to not support you anymore. Let's analyze how any form of movements work in the first place, right? They garner support and they garner critical mass. When progressive social liberal movements lose that critical mass, you lose that form of support and legitimacy in the first place because you are seen as counterintuitive and at the same time hypocritical. How then liberals lose out on this, right? Like I've already talked about, how liberals then lose out on support, you lose out on critical mass. It's very important to push for liberal laws and to push for social progressive movements. Therefore, looking back into how this different spectrum of views will be analyzed, we think that it's best that the progressive social movement stick to its stand and stick to the status quo. Why? Because change has been happening. Like look at the developing world, liberal democracy, where freedom of speech is very protected. You are allowed hate speech. As long as you don't hurt someone, you're allowed to be racist in your thoughts. You're allowed to be sexist in your thoughts. But now you don't allow these things to happen because you now clamp down on those voices, and you also at the same time don't allow counter narrative to happen. On the government side, they say that they clamp down on voices that are extremists. They say that with this illiberal law, we shut the extremists down and we allow these people voices to express. But in developing country, where your governments are oppressive, when your governments use this law to clamp down any views that are against the monarchy or against the government, these people who are liberal cannot voice themselves out, even if they are on the right spectrum of the society, even if they are supporting these progressive movements. We don't think they have any form of avenue, any form of platform, because you entrench the negative social construct within society. Therefore, we think that the progressive liberal movements will have to always stand on its side and to support these liberal laws in the first place. Now, this debate is also how you subjugating people to these harms, right? These laws are already in place. Now, progressive liberal movements hijacking this law and further entrench within society. And we think that's counterintuitive. What has eye-opening government for you? We properly characterize what are all these illiberal laws and how progressive social movements have always been fighting these laws and taking a different stance is bad and counterproductive. Therefore, you lose that critical mass that your movements need to push for liberalization, especially in oppressive government, oppressive societies. And secondly, we also tell you how it affects different spectrums of people within society. How you legitimize thoughts of extremists because you no longer allow any form of counter narrative to moderate these people. And lastly, you allow moderates and liberals to lose that form of critical mass that needs liberalization and support in the first place. Therefore, we believe that the progressive social movement should stick to its stance and to continue fighting this oppressive law for the freedom of expression for society.
Mr. Speaker, when the very purpose of social progression and such movements is diminished, it represents grave harm to society. It's with great regret that certain people like Donald Trump are allowed to tweet xenophobic sentiments. We believe that this freedom to say anything we want is not absolute, and such freedom is given to people when counter-narratives in society already exist. We believe in the world today, counter-narratives to curb those opinions, those bigotry and xenophobic sentiments is not available. And we believe it's okay for us to impose illiberal laws, and it's okay for us to fight for illiberal laws to curb those kind of opinions. Sharik already told you that this is not the case. Counter-narratives are not available in society, and therefore we need to take active action that balances such discussion. Opening opposition's naive characterization of the world these minorities have to live in and the kind of harms they face did nothing to undermine our case. Because as I'm going to tell you, that these are not the kind of laws that we're fighting for. We don't think that women's rights groups would fight for anti-sedition laws. We don't think that any law that is illiberal in nature is one that we are fighting for. Our model is that social movements should fight for laws regulating views expressed against them. Under status quo, we have laws against hate speech. That doesn't mean no one can ever say anything. No one can ever say anything. But more importantly, few key points. Alison wanted to argue how violence will increase right now because we are scoping counter-narratives. But the truth of the matter is that counter-narratives are absent in status quo. Counter-narratives to curb xenophobic opinions are absent in status quo because people don't buy into that opinion at the first place. In our world, bigoted narratives are curbed in an albeit illiberal way. I agree, and I'll prove to you how balancing this against the benefits we give to you, Mr. Speaker, is an okay trade-off that we're ready to do. And secondly, she wanted to argue a case where moderates will not buy into the narrative and support these kind of movements. We believe that moderates are more about actual harms upon people as a result of bad speech than they're about the abstract principles of free speech, Mr. Speaker. Because we see college campuses in the United States wholly boycott hate speech speakers like Bill Maher, etc. And we believe that when they boycott them, they're okay with boycotting hate speeches and things that portray sentiments against the normal generic liberal society. We believe that moderates are more about retrospective sentiments on the actual harms to these minorities. We wanted to be preemptive, Mr. Speaker, and inhibit this operation in xenophobic sentiments in the very first place. We believe that this is a better world that we provide to you at the end of the day. So what am I going to tell you today? I'm going to talk to you about two things. Firstly, how the policing of such discourse is going to happen and why it's better. And secondly, I'm going to tell you how this leads to a far better intergenerational change in things. So before I go to my first point,
How do you defend liberal movements when you're not principally inconsistent and all this while you've been fighting those oppressive laws first?
The point is that illiberal movements that curb the rights of minorities to say things and the rights of minorities to congregate is the governments are willing to inhibit them. But we believe that illiberal laws that curb the majority sentiments in order to curb their oppression in the first place is wrong. And we believe that this is what we need to provide. And the illiberal laws that curb the xenophobic sentiments provided by people like Donald Trump is something that we stand for. So what's wrong today? Because these sentiments and these speeches, etc., Mr. Speaker, appeal to the bigotry inside the people. People can consume in a readily available manner the things that they want to believe in. And what does this lead to? This leads to limiting of their capabilities to overcome their own personal bias and give credit to the other side. As long as there is a general consensus and a majority opinion about certain things, about certain minorities, there is no incentive for these xenophobic people or for these bigoted people to change and question yourself. Moreover, as I told you before, the debate is not balanced. It's like me going as O against Twinkle Zimbabwe speech. This balanced restoration is important. We believe that illiberal laws to curb majoritarian speech against these certain kind of minorities and social factions is important. And secondly, and more importantly, Mr. Speaker, actual violence acts are enticed against certain factions of society. We see homosexuals are actually beaten to death. Gangs look around for people to commit heinous crimes, etc. This is enabled by these things that derive from misinterpretation of liberal culture. People read blogs, watch videos, listen to speeches that entice them to take active action against certain minorities. And this further pushes and widens the gap between social factions, which socially progressive movements are inherently against. That's why they're called socially progressive. They tend to limit and narrow the gap between social factions and bring social mobility to the people at the end of the day. We believe that it's in the best interest of these movements to take this route to further their agenda, to provide social mobility to different social factions of the society. We believe that social movements bring people up the social ladder. They bring people who are historically discriminated, and these movements gain traction to equate the social playing field. And we bring further mobility to people. Anti-movement discourse and hate speeches pushes this traction back and actually widens the gap between socially progressive movements. Moving on to my second point about how change things over generations and how we lead to a far better world in the long run and how we push further and a speedy process for this change. But before that, anyone? Okay, go ahead.
Within developing countries and oppressive governments, these progressive movements fighting for these illiberal laws that these oppressive governments put in place anyways, don't you stagnate that form of change that you want?
I don't think so, because right now these people are in the very, very worst state in developing countries in and of itself. We actually give them a way to fight their oppression at the very end of the day. Moving on, maybe in the short run, people feel disenfranchised and say the majority feels disenfranchised and people cannot voice their opinion regarding certain movements and change. What do we bring to you, Mr. Speaker? That over time, intergenerational gap of social mobility is enabled. Over time, we observe that moderation comes into place. How does this happen? Firstly, because these people over generations have never heard or seldom heard the most extreme of notions against social factions. And secondly, are surrounded by media that does not limit their capability to think and does not push inherent biases against certain sections of the society. We believe that we see currently the media is developing into an entity that espouses liberal values, and we believe that these things would actually help over generations to level the social playing field. It's far less likely for people over time to develop inherent biases and their own notions. And secondly, the propensity of potential of actual violent backlash and marginalization towards certain sections of society, towards minority, is minimalized on our side, Mr. Speaker. So what have we told you today? We've told you that over generations, the social mobility and the very purpose of social movements is enabled by this by the fruition of this policy. And secondly, we told you that policy movements discourse is actually important in limiting the kind of violence that happens in the current world. For this very reasons, we're very proud.
Mr. Speaker, I have two main points of argumentation to you today. Firstly, on how using of these illiberal laws goes against the moral code and principles of socially progressive movements, why that's bad. Secondly, on how it creates a very antagonistic society that cannot possibly understand the changes and sustain it. But before I go into that, let's deal with the really confusing government. Because somehow or another, according to them, the main premise of their case is twofold. First, they want to generate change. They say that change cannot generate now because there's no form of counter-narrative that the majority abuses the minority, oppresses the minority. What's their solution? Their solution is, hey, I know, let's create more laws so we can oppress the majority now. That's a very counterintuitive proposition. Why? Twofold, right? Firstly, if you allow for new laws to be created based on sentiment, based on what is being said, in order to subjugate one group, you lend legitimacy to the usage of laws in subjugation of any group. That means anytime anyone brings up an idea that is counterintuitive or a counter narrative that should not be said, any one of the other parties can use those laws to fight against them. Secondly, the usage of these laws would also leave it open to the abuse by your corrupt government, by your conservative societies that don't want to allow for discourse to occur. That makes the situation even worse, because even though they might curb on some of the majority sentiments, they do not allow the minority sentiments to flourish. If you want to have change, you need to allow for the sentiment, for those views that are considered in the minority to not be curbed. Curbing the majority view does not equate to allowing the minorities to have a voice, especially when curbing the majority can result in the minority being subjugated as well. Sit down. Secondly, right, on this whole idea about the moderates that they wanted to talk about, we have to understand something. How do the moderates actually view things? According to them, they only look at actual harms. Exactly. Let's look at what are the actual harms that exist. Because when you allow the use of these illiberal laws, you are using them to curb free speech, you are using them to curb expression, like what Alison told you earlier, right? Because the usage of these laws goes against what the moderates believe, against the principles that the moderate hold dear, it creates an actual harm to them. It's not the fact that the law exists, it's the fact that you use those laws to clamp down on people and they are seeing those people suffer. That means there is an actual harm, and that is likely to disincentivize moderates from joining your parade. Okay? Rest of my rebuttals will be integrated. Sit down. Now, let's look at my first issue. On the idea of the moral code of social progressive movements, we need to understand, why are they taking this stance? Why are they fighting against these sort of illiberal laws and social constructs? The answer is very simple. Because they view it as a clear harm. They view it as being an infringement of people's rights. For example, blasphemy laws infringe on the rights of people to express their religion, to practice their religion in a way they see fit. That to the socially progressive movement is a clear harm to individuals that they cannot allow to happen, that they abhor happening in status quo. What do they want on their side of the house? What they want to do is they want to take other individuals that they don't agree with, and subject them to the very harm that the socially progressive movements are fighting against. That goes against the very principles, the core tenets of what these movements are fighting, because they are fighting against the subjugation of other individuals to the harmful effects of the law, to an unfair and oppressive law that causes clear harm to them. What's the comparative on our side? On our side, when we fight against these stances, we prevent those harm from spreading even more. It matters not whether or not you are on the right side of the fence, whether you are Republican, Democrat, Conservative, Liberal. What matters is that you are a human being. Sit down. What matters is that you are right as an individual, regardless of your political affiliation, regardless of your gender, your view on racism, whatever it is, that it always be respected. Those are the moral codes that the socially progressive movement is fighting for. And that's why they should not adopt their policy which goes directly against that. Before I move on, sure.
So most countries already have laws against hate speech. Would you also oppose them and support racial slurs against minorities?
Look, let's understand how hate speech actually works. Hate speech, when it works, especially in developed nations, occurs when there's a clear harm to what you're saying. When, for example, you say, let's all gather and join a Ku Klux Klan membership and go and kill a few African Americans. That's hate speech for you. But you saying that I don't like African Americans does not constitute hate speech, which is what we're telling you happens. The narrative then is that there needs to be, for their motion to work, there needs to be that harm. On our side, we don't want to allow that to happen. On to my second argument, right? The whole idea of the type of society that it creates and the antagonistic effect. Because in their paradigm of using laws, sit down, to fight against one another, using illiberal laws to oppress individuals and have oppressed us, it creates a chain of violence, a cycle of violence. Because essentially what it's doing is creating loser after loser. It's a war mentality that is perpetuated within the society in and of itself. Whenever you say something against me, I'm going to sue you, and then you counter sue. That is not good for the progress and for the acceptance of change. On the comparative, how does change happen on our side? Like what we told you early on, right? When you allow for the movement to grow, when you allow for discourse to happen, when you allow for individuals to talk it out, to find a common ground, that's when you allow for discourse to happen. when you are actively fighting against individuals, when you are telling them that I'm going to drag you to court, you do not create a situation, an environment that is conducive to discourse. In fact, you make them angry at you and you make them much less palatable to any form of change. The comparative on our side guarantees that these individuals, because the method of pushing for change has been in a peaceful manner, has not been antagonistic, over time they are more likely to open up, especially when you have the support growing in the grassroots levels. There is no incentive, there is no reason, no grudge for them to bear against you. There is no harm that has been felt for them, but rather they are making that change because it's the right thing to do. On the other side of the house, it doesn't happen in that way because it's seen as an attack. A very clear example of this is the progression of the LGBT movement in America. How did the LGBT movement go about it? Did they drag everyone they could find to court and sue them for everything they were? No. They went out, they appealed to the masses. They told them, look, this is what we are fighting for. We are fighting for our rights as individuals. We are fighting for our right not to be oppressed. We are not here to oppress you. We are not here to infringe on your rights. We just don't want you to do the same to us. Because of that narrative, it allowed for the change to garner. It allowed for the movement to gather a groundswell of support and push for change. What was the end result of that change? Look at the decision by the Supreme Court, which legalized gay marriage. That, in essence, is what how using a grassroots level approach and not creating an antagonistic effect allows for the discourse to be palatable and allows it for it to be sustainable. On our side of the house, we bring you change. They don't. Thank you.
You watch me.
Opening myself.
Watch me applying naming.
You watch me here, I'll watch you read.
Okay, here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we need to be very clear in today's debate. What are the laws we're speaking of? We're not talking about laws that are anti-monarchy laws or anti-government laws. Because obviously, these social progressive groups wouldn't use these laws. The people who use these laws are the government who want you to talk bad about them. So you think, ladies and gentlemen, you caveat whatever they talk about in their case. We argue to you that the laws we're speaking of that we utilize for the social progressive movements are laws like anti-blasphemy laws. You don't want these people going out of society drawing naked photos of Jesus or putting photos of speaking about Prophet Muhammad in a very, very bad sense, right? These are the kind of laws that we're trying to look at, right? And whether these social movements look at these laws. So what are some assumptions of today's debate? First assumption, that this law already exists. So whatever they say, we're going to enact new laws, it's not necessarily a burden to defend, but because this motion says where it already exists. So we're not going to discuss on whether these laws are legitimate or not. Secondly, these social movements are progressive. They're not like a few bunch of gay guys in your backyard. These are people who have some form of legitimacy and gain some traction in society. So we shall argue here why their behavior will not be so aggressive and we attack anyone indiscriminately and oppress the minority as you have characterized. Last but not least, we argue that we have to put an assumption that these laws are reasonable. These are not laws that are way too draconian, right? We are not, of course, we're not going to expect social progressive movements and tell them to go and support laws. And let's say you say something bad, your hand can get chopped off. Of course, these laws are not legitimate in the first place. We're not going to get these people to support. So this debate is about more gray areas, and we think they should whether it's in the best interest of them to fight for this. So we argue first of all whether there will be abuse on this laws. So first of all, we argue that these are social progressive movements, which we can argue that you are socially progressive, which means that you like this cause. You appreciate multiple points of view. So you don't necessarily have incentive to shut everyone with dissenting opinion, right? What we argue today is that these social progressive groups want to shut down the extreme trolls, the people who draw naked photos of Jesus and Muhammad's, right? Because these people do not add value to discourse. They only sow discord and disharmony, right? We think these are people we don't want in society entering our chat rooms and all that. These are people we hate, right? So we argue that they will use this indiscriminately and attack every individual who dissents and does not agree with their movement. So we think Shenton on that virtue is correct. But last but not least, right? Even these laws were to get into like court, right? We argue that the government is not necessarily unreasonable, right? The checks and balances, right? Because you're not going to punish people for actually saying something bad. You're going to punish people who actually purposely put a photo of Muhammad and tell the whole world that this Muhammad is bad or whatever, right? Because we argue, right, that in laws and crimes, right, there's actors real and mens rea, right? So we're going to argue and go for those people with a very serious mens rea, intention to cause deliberate harm to society. Those are people you want to actually attack, right? Not attack the common man who does disagree with you. So we think, ladies and gentlemen, we have every character view, there won't be abuse of the system. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question of today's debate is whether in the best interest of these advocacies to use these forms of laws. We bring to you two extensions today. First of all, it shows that they are protecting society and gains them legitimacy and traction. Secondly, we're going to provide more extension on why this improves discourse. But first of all, on why it accords better protection. Because we argue, ladies and gentlemen, that when you are a minority group, we argue that you feel very afraid, you feel very scared to speak out, right? So let's say when someone draws a naked photo of Jesus or Prophet Muhammad, right? You may not be you'll be very hesitant to speak up. Because you feel that if you speak up, people will harass you and all that. But what the social progressive movements can do is organize themselves collectively and then protect you, right? Go to the court on your behalf, right? When you're so scared to speak out against the kind of majority groups that are actually oppressing you, right? So we think, ladies and gentlemen, the advocacy and representation for these minorities are very important, right? Because we argue that these people may not be too afraid to utilize these laws. So a collective organization is a better way of doing so. We argue that these collective organizations have law experts, lawyers who can fight about advocacy much better, right? Because we argue that this is how we actually push for representation better. When people see social progressive movements as more representative of their inherent struggles, right? That's where they gain traction and more people join these movements. We think that's how you shape and build society. Second extension, why you improve the score. I already talked about that the main people who want to eliminate in this debate are those people who are extreme trolls, people who draw naked photos or whatever. So we exclude these extreme trolls who do not add value to the discussion. We argue that you improve the quality of discourse. Because we argue, right, discourse only occurs when people see eye to eye and not get so hung up with emotions or hatred and all that, right? You only get a shit logical point of view in the absence of these trolls who are trying to distract everyone. Instead of discussing the main issue, you get so distracted. What did you say to that?
Look, laws are already in place to protect the minorities, for example, quotas for women. How do your grey areas beneficial to the change that has already been happening within status quo?
Okay, we are going to fight for more laws to protect the minority rights of women. So we're going to get the social progressive groups to gain traction, and how we're going to gain traction is to tell them to use these laws to protect women or whoever is being harassed, right? We think this is very, very important for the advocacy. This is what I mentioned in my first extension. My second extension, right, when you use these laws to eliminate trolls from discussion, right, it improves the quality of discourse, as I mentioned. But what exactly does this actually cause? Because we argue, right, you create some form of deterrent effect. These social progressive groups, right, will go and hunt you down if you are a very big extreme troll. We argue that this is very, very important, right? So it causes people to watch what they say. Now, when I mention this watch what they say, right, people say, oh, guys, it's an attack on the freedom of expression. Now, my opponent is already argued to you, your freedom of expression is not absolute, right? The extents to it. The extents are there's so much discord in society, and every mention, you must have a mention of causing deliberate harm, right? These are the that do not add value to discussion and to cause so much devastation. Secondly, B, the extent only extends if you hurt another and attack the person on their identity, right? We argue painting pictures of Muhammad or saying that he's evil and all that kind of thing, right? It's an attack on someone's identity that the government ought to protect. And we think that social progressive movements are a vehicle for the government to vehicle to represent people in the protection of such liberties and identities of people. Because we argue that this kind of hate speech and very disfavorable speech, right, in the most extreme circumstances, right, are very, very harmful and dehumanizing to many, many groups of people. Because when I see the Prophet Muhammad put up on a poster and people talking so much about it, I feel extremely traumatized because it's representative of my religion. It's the symbol of all my values and what I believe, right? Without a starting point where everyone can feel safe and in their discussion without the elimination of extreme trolls, right? That's not how you get proper discourse. Because the other discourse, right, is to include all sectors of society, right? Sectors were minorities, right? And we argue that a lot of these minorities do not enter these sectors of discourse because they're too afraid. They feel that they get harassed and all that, right? So they have to write some harassment laws. You have harassment laws, use them and use them to protect these people. So I argue that's very, very important. So, ladies and gentlemen, we think it's very important to protect the vulnerable people of society using the laws that the government has created, and we're proud to propose. Thank you. Just start debating what I call him.
Do you want to?
I do.
My friend yes. Okay.
Two points of clarification before my speech begins. As Justin rightly pointed out, that this progressive social movement is not the government. So it means that to the extent that you want to prove mens rea and actus rea into things like seditious law, you also have to prove the same burden that states normally have to prove. You have to prove that someone intended to cause this certain act beyond a reasonable doubt. We think ultimately in those circumstances, you don't have the power of the state prosecution, and it means necessarily that it's harder for you to enforce a claim, and harder for you to show that there's enough evidence to prove that these people were culpable for said offences, unlike in ordinary circumstances. This means that the quick fix that OG wanted to talk about wasn't really a quick fix. You won't get a chance to succeed in every scenario and circumstance. And it's important for us to consider in those cases what happens if these movements fail to get their claim passing court. The second clarification relates to this weird idea about harassment laws. And let's make it very clear. The sedition laws that we're talking about here, the illiberal laws, are different from anti-harassment laws insofar as that where the latter is concerned, you also have to prove that speech and harm are very closely related and very closely knit. Like in order to have a restraining order against your spouse, you need to prove that there's a clear propensity for family violence going to occur. And where harassment is concerned, yes, I read the Women's Charter yesterday. I've been doing it for the past week. And where harassment is concerned, you have to also prove that there's a strong sight and sound requirement that someone was either stalking you for long extended periods of time, or you ultimately have to prove that this person is out there for malicious intent to go after you and you specifically. And in those instances, the clarification needs to be made that the action is between you as an individual against that particular person. It's not you against another person. You're just preventing him from being able to say nasty things around you. You're not forcing him to stop saying nasty things per se and to curb his expression or curb his expression ultimately. So a few things that I'll be talking about in my speech today. I'll be doing firstly a scenario analysis, and I'm going to talk to show you that no matter what happens, no matter how the suit goes, you lose. But I'm also going to tell you in the alternative that no matter what happens, no matter what actor you talk about, you still lose out as a social progressive movement. First point, that you lose out no matter how the suit goes. I've already told you how the social progressive movements will not automatically succeed. But in the event that they succeed, perhaps it's good for the short term. Perhaps, so in a certain point of view, the quality of life that OG wants to talk about will be enforced or will be protected. But in the long run, we put to you that it brings into light the narrative that it's okay for you to voice this law. It's okay for things like the Sedition Act and the ISA, Internal Security Act, to continue to exist. And in those instances, it's very hard for the social movement to buy into the idea that these laws ought to be abrogated, these laws ought to be now, but for the sheer reason that it will be brought to light that you have used those laws in the first place. That's deleterious for the other people that the state uses when they try to clamp down, that the state uses to clamp down on liberal dissenters. But more than that, we put to you that where you fail, perhaps it's good for the progressive movement per se, and it's good for progressive ideals, but it also means that the state is now seen as a driver for social change, because they can use the laws, they are using the Sedition Act to push their agenda the same way that you are, and now you have become, now as a social progressive movement, you become an irrelevant actor because you're unable to drive the same sorts of change. Second idea, how no matter what, the social progressive movement also lose out. Let's first talk about the conservatives and how in these instances, you curb on freedom of expression, you're also imposing your idea of liberal tyranny on the conservatives. We put to you that the conservatives will be drawn away for the first idea, because firstly, the social progressive movement are now being seen as hypocrites. That they want to propose a liberal agenda, but they seem to be doing it through nefarious means. In alternative, they also see nothing wrong with what the government is doing anymore, with what the government is doing in those instances, because it's okay for the government to pass these laws because it ultimately protects individuals in the first place. It also loses, thirdly, the credence among the movement in the first place. What do we mean by that? We think it fragments the people within the movement, and this is where I address the closing idea that you actually unify the movement. Why is this? Yes, sir.
So did banning of Holocaust denial in Europe mean that the European governments were able to pass anti-sedition laws and all sorts of totalitarian laws in their country?
The banning of Holocaust denial is not. Lucas will address that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Let's talk very quickly about unifying the people within the movement. Maybe if I understand what you're trying to talk about, I'll address you. But we put to you that within these movements are people along the fence, people like progressive Muslims, people like conservative gays, who have joined the movement ultimately because they believe that you as movement stand for certain ideals, and you're able to navigate within those ideals, even if in some instances it doesn't quite coincide with what you believe is true. We put to you that in the instance that you start using these laws, you start using certain things that these people within those movements hate ordinarily. It's very difficult for you to say that you are still co-opting everybody in the movement, everything that's particularly bad. But let's also talk about the liberal tyranny and who apparently benefits most from this movement. No, thank you, sir. We put to you that you're now emboldening the most vicious of people, the most extreme of the liberals in these instances, because they are able to drown out the voices of those people who seem to go against their view. We think that's bad, because while all says that you're drowning out the counter narrative is somewhat bad, we're going to extend to you and we're going to tell you why this counter narrative is so important to begin with. Because we think that thwarting is the best chance for any sort of systematic improvement to take place. You need those irrational voices being drawn out in those environments because you need any sorts of positive systematic change. What do I mean by that? It means a law. It means a change in social attitude which people can co-opt into and people can understand. But the thing is, laws and social attitudes require also the need for the individual citizen on the ground to abrogate his own rights. And where he is unable to voice out his concern, where you are unable to co-opt his view, he will necessarily dislike that view. We think also, finally, that you are also distancing people from being able to psychologically co-opt in the moment you engage in certain illiberal stances. We think that in those instances, we think that ideas like racism and gender discrimination is hinged upon things like irrationality. But to the extent it hinges on irrationality, it's also necessary for you to engage in irrational stances like being able to stand up for your own ideals, even if it means that there's a short-term cost to it.
Yeah. Let's start off with tackling some of what closing opposition has said. They say that now the government will be seen as the driver of social change, and now the progressive social movements themselves will be seen as an irrelevant actor and won't be relevant in this at all. But we see this as false, right? Because we are not talking when we implement these laws, we're not saying that the government will take over like all operations that these social progressive movements are part of. We are saying that we are protecting these social progressive movements who now will have some sort of legitimacy, will be protected by the law, and will not be open directly for attacks that might come their way, right? Now, this brings us to the first question: what is law and how it is implemented and whether it will be abused? Like my speaker has said, ultimately we believe that these laws will not be abused, but what we are trying to bring to you is that laws, right? Before a law can be enacted, all laws are legitimate because laws go through a strict and rigorous process of checks and balances before they are approved. Before they are approved, and all these unfairness and all that will be regulated, and so only.
Ishona, isn't it a little odd that a reasonable government under your side with checks and balances with illiberal laws not working with it?
Yeah. Illiberal laws such as sedition law, such as the Sedition Act, right, has in fact been proven to be helpful to our society. This prevents people from going out and saying racial slurs, and it prevents people from openly discriminating against these people in minority groups, right? These also help make sure that our society is in a better place today. It has in fact progressed society and not allowed it to stagnate. We are trying to show you today on our side that these illiberal laws are not just these illiberal laws cannot be taken as their name value and just simply illiberal. These laws exist for the purpose of progressing society as well as protecting minority groups that might get overlooked in this process where minority voices are louder. A question we have to answer today is what these laws does for these social progressive movements. We tell you that these laws don't necessarily make these movements illegitimate and hypocritical. Why doesn't it do so? Because laws, like I said before, laws are made to protect the minority, and these minorities are normally the ones that are in these social progressive movements, trying to make a difference in society and trying to make an impact, right? So we are saying that these laws are perfectly right and perfectly suited to be there, so that these social progressive movements won't be hindered and can move forward and can progress society in that movement. Only with this, right, we believe that progress will be able to be achieved, and people will then be better to bring about such change, and they will now be given power, and they will now be seen as something that is worth looking at. If I tell you that this social progressive movement has no protection by the laws, you can just attack them however you want, they will never be seen as a legitimate form to move society forward. They will never be seen as something that you should listen to, and you'll never be seen as something that can be of help to you. Laws are meant to keep social fabric together. We don't care if it's hypocritical or if it's illegitimate, but we're saying that they are not. They exist for we think that right, these laws will not harm the progress of these, and it will in fact move such movements forward, right? Then, if your law is approved by illiberal and oppressive government, aren't you legitimizing negative rhetorics that this kind of government use to stop people from speaking out? No, we are not saying that. Ultimately, these laws are to prevent you from directly attacking them, like maybe going on their compounds and attacking these people, putting up big signs outside of their gates. Right? What these laws are meant to. These laws are meant to protect them against those kind of attacks. We are perfectly happy for this cause to happen, as so long as it doesn't harm so long as it doesn't infringe on another person's identity, their religion, or what they truly believe in, right? So this is why we need these laws, right? These laws are to protect their identities, and it is to make sure that these people remain relevant in the remain relevant in all sectors of society. We want to represent all sectors of these minorities without them feeling fear. We want to give them some sort of legitimacy so that they are able to speak out and not be heated and not be pressed down. They are seem to think that all illiberal laws will be oppressive and not allow anyone to speak up at all, right? But what we've shown you is that these laws are meant to protect and not meant to oppress. Because ultimately we are fighting for this liberal progressive movements that will move society forward ultimately. Our stand for today, and what we are fighting for is to ensure that our side better protects these people in minority groups, and it will better progress society forward. And it will also make sure that these minorities who are trying to speak up, trying to get their voice heard, are not being oppressed and not being oppressed by larger groups. In fact, giving them legitimacy to continue doing what they're doing and allow them to ultimately have a say in everything, right? Have a say in what they are trying to say, right? What have I shown you today? We have shown you that, our side better protects these progressive social movements. We've also shown you that we do not oppress the people who are speaking out against these movements. Other than that, we also protect the people that are protect the individuals who might not necessarily be part of the social progressive movement, but are the individuals that are directly involved in it, right? If you stand for the side, that will better progress society. Please go faster.
Yes. Yeah, begin. I'll do three things in my whip speech. One, I will describe what the world actually is like so this debate can progress with some clarity. Number two, I think O did a good job meta grabbing, but I'll spend my second quotation talking why CO over O. And number three, I'll talk about how we solve racism. Second one's the best, I promise you. So, first one, what is the world really like? The thing is, CG correctly pointed out that progressive social movements are not the government, so they want to pass these laws, you have to apply to the government saying, this is a lawsuit, please find this group guilty. And Colin already told you that in law you can't find groups guilty in general, you have to particularize the suit to an individual. On this side of the house, Justin says, number one, that laws already exist in the status quo, and his first minute of his speech. And in the fifth minute, he says we'll also fight for more laws to protect people. So, odd night here, not sure where that's going. But why Colin's essential is so important is because he's the only speaker this round who gave this scenario analysis of what happens when a progressive social movement applies to use the law. Either the government listens to you, jails the people who speak out against you, and that's good for you but hurts progressivism. Or if the government doesn't listen to you, that's good for progressivism, but now they drive progressivism, and you as a movement are hypocritical and, as Colin said, irrelevant. So this is where we think the world works. The second thing we need to clear up is what kind of laws we are talking about, because you get this bunch of dribble from the government talking about hate speech laws with identity protection. Now, this is why I asked the QI, in what world do you have a reasonable government with lots of democratic checks and illegal laws at the same time? This is really difficult. But even if you take it the best case, and you want to talk about only hate speech laws, number one, that's very narrow, info slide, okay? And number two, this is hardly illiberal, because there's a wide spectrum of laws ranging illiberality, and hate speech is at the fluffy end of the spectrum, when Les Nogent is at the awful end of the spectrum, and the ISA. So there are burdens to defend everything. Because if the closing government says that the laws are quite reasonable, then mana other debate, alright? So there's no problem here. So what we further gave you an extension, call it against this, is about liberal tyranny. Why is this so important? Because you cannot guarantee that the social movement will stop at hate speech, they'll look at everything else. For example, in Cambridge, in the Cambridge Union debates, there were a bunch of women who banned an anti-abortion speaker because they said his speech was enacting violence against women. They were then called feminazis. Here's the thing, if the movement's extreme liberal elements, as called against it, are given a lot of oxygen, then you cannot count on the movement to be able to reach and bridge the discourse, which is why we think this is a big problem. And answering the argument of banning Holocaust denial precisely gave the neo-Nazis to the Germany oxygen, and the Communist Party also got enough seats to ride into parliament on a wave of anti-Semitism. Do you think this is the problem overall? Sure.
Your assumption that all liberals fetishize the consistency of liberalism, and that is why they return against the is nonsense. Because debaters, for example, debaters tend to be extremely liberal generally. They're still quite happy to support equity policies, stopping people from saying things.
I understand they want things balanced. Our analysis was social movements are not homogeneous. There's always an extreme liberal fringe that captures the media oxygen and makes the whole movement look bad. Easy my argument. Now, second point of contention, why CO over OO? Yes, you notice a lot of these vertical extensions, but OO has four main arguments that we extended on all of them. The first argument OO said is that this mechanism will somehow work, but CO does better by actually analyzing the mechanism, because we already showed you, as I said, how the progressive social movement may or may not succeed in getting the law passed, which means in the worst case you get all of the harms and none of the protections. The second large argument coming off opening off is that moderates will not support the movement. We completely agree with this, but it goes a lot deeper than that. Because the progressive social movement is not homogeneous, as it gets larger and presumably more successful, they need to be united to lobby for change. This is when Colin brought up the argument of conservative Muslims or conservative gay people, because there's a heavy amount of intersectionality within a growing social movement. This means that when you pass these illiberal laws, you're now forcing these people to choose between their nascent progressivism and their cultural historical roots, which is to say, you are fragmenting your movement at the very margins of the people who you want to get on board, which hurts your ability to lobby for long-term change. The third argument coming off opening opposition, I can't believe I'm doing this, is that you are now justifying the use of the laws to oppress any other group. We agree completely with this, but it goes a lot beyond that. Because what Colin told you is that illiberal governments have narratives that they say this is about overarching social harmony, this is about national security. Now you are making the government narrative sound like it's correct. This means you've destroyed the inclination of any potential liberals and moderates to listen to you, especially the idealistic youth who are full of idealism and now feel cheated by the movement. And the fourth thing they said is that we want to find common ground and reach discourse. But this is where Colin's admittedly last-minute extension is also very important, because he pointed out that you cannot just convince people at the intellectual level, you have to convince them at the psychological level as well. Because when you attack people, their instinct is to be emotionally defensive. Our policy allows you to engage them not just in intellectual discourse, but the very fact that you respect their views enough to hear them, predisposes them to hear your stories on an emotional and visceral level. This is why Humans of New York is so successful in painting human stories which therefore never existed, therefore proving that we probably extended the hell out of SDO. Now, third argument on how we stop racism. Sorry, it's a debate, have to win. So the first argument in advance under how we stop racism is that people are hurt by free speech and we have to protect them against violence. But where will it stop? Just by curbing views doesn't mean to curb violence. We already ban violence against the individual human being. But the very people who are prone to committing violence are the neo-conservatives. Under your policy, now the neo-conservatives are justified in their belief that they're under siege mentality and that they're under attack. That is defending our faith, defending our nation. So two impacts flow off this. Number one, there's going to be no questioning of the self that opening government talks about, because they're now more solid in their beliefs. Number two, the backlash will fade, it will intensify. This means that none of the policies lead to the long-term outcome. This is just at best papering over the cracks. But what do we give you instead on closing opposition? We argue in extension again that we need to get moderation to stop being extreme by being emotionally open. This is where you win over the moderates, and this is where they pass ballot initiatives. That's where you get enough people to vote for your changes. This is why Obergefell versus Hodges, the Supreme Court striking down the bans against gay marriage, started by ballot initiatives in 23 states. This is how you get actual change coming up. So CAG says that at least we need some basic protection at first. This is their best case analysis. But the reason is that legal protection is never a be-all and all. The reason why feminism has multiple ways is because the first wave is always about seeking legal protection, but there's always a second way to seek social acceptance and a third way to seek self-actualization. If you paper over the cracks and make the world defensive and emotionally predisposed to hate you, you will get the first place, but none of the second and none of the third. Our policy is the only one. It will actually make people stand up and listen, question themselves. Because at the end of the day, what CO brings you is that getting people to shut up their speech doesn't mean they will listen to you. It doesn't mean that you will change the law. Ultimately, we favor the long and hard road to get people to engage with you, and that's the only chance we have for success in the long run. We're very proud of
Thank you.